Back in my day, there was this thing called the Rubik's Cube. It was a puzzle that you twisted and turned to get all the colors to one side and to make a beautiful pattern where all the colors aligned. And it seemed like no matter how you twisted or turned, it would just lead to utter frustration and seemed impossible to solve. It seemed like almost that you needed to be a magician and have a magic trick to do it. However, what you discovered was that there was a pattern, that there was a system into doing it. And once you learned that pattern and system, it would take you mere seconds to solve. And you would never have to use anything else to do it. It could be jumbled as much as possible, and still, if you use the system, you'll solve it. In writing, there's something similar called the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is a system that's designed to help you tell your story. Most stories, if not all, have a 3-act structure. It's the how you get to the 3-act structure that's the interesting part in writing, because not everybody does it the same. There are many methods that you can use to get to the 3-act structure, and that is what this show is about, as we take a look at how you develop your own 3-act structure that works for you.
I'm Jim Nettles. I write fiction, nonfiction, on the fiction side of the house, science fiction, urban fantasy, horror, a little contemporary, dabbling into some steampunks, and got a couple more projects coming out the door. On the nonfiction side, I write about privacy, data security, stuff that nobody cares about. I also have Business Essentials for Writers, is a book that's out there as well. I am the founder for Author Essentials, which is an author services and author education company. And last but not least, I'm also one of the founders for the Continual online convention as well.
Hi, I'm ANITA Stewart. I write under AF Stewart. I write horror and fantasy, a little poetry. I've got a trilogy out. I got my new series coming out in October, and all about Arthurian legend and weird stuff. And that's me.
Hi, I'm Julia. I write as J.K. Allen. I write primarily young adult urban fantasy, but I do dabble in things like horror, and poetry is my first love. And I am big into editing and stuff like that, so this is like the perfect topic for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Karina KANTAS. I'm a prolific author. I write in most fiction genres. I have 13 books published. I also have a podcast, Behind the Pen, and I'm a radio host with the Artist First Radio Network. I also run Author Assist, which is services for authors.
First and foremost, the question I have to ask, because I don't think people realize that there are different ways to plot and different ways to outline, that there are different methods. So what is the method that you all use to do your outlining and plotting?
I've started using scene outlining to do my novels, which I find is a lot easier for me, which basically I just outline all the scenes that I want in the novel with maybe one line or a few words. And that way I can rearrange things, add things if I need to, take away things. It makes it a lot easier for me when I'm doing my outlining.
So I write everything from flash and very short pieces to, as they call them, gnome killers, and about everything in between. How I plot depends on what it is. So if it's a short story, a lot of the time I am a pantser. It's grab the short story, play with it, crank it out. And a lot of the time I'll use short stories as a tool to help develop the bigger piece, whether it's looking at the characters, looking at the world building. Writing a short story, kind of pulling it by the pants, can be a really good exercise. Now, if I want to publish it, then I'm still going to run it against certain tests to see did it meet these conditions. For novellas, I tend to at least do high-level outlines, which, scenes, the major pieces, major components. When I'm writing full-blown novels, or like some of the series I've got going on, one of the ones which I have, which is a 7-book series, which right now is stuck on book 4 because I kind of screwed up my outline. Not that it has anything to do with this topic whatsoever, but if you're trying to figure out how to move into outlining, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat method that gets used by everybody is a really good framework to start from. And then figure out what sins you want to commit or which rules you want to kind of break. Because once you know the rules, you can then come in and break them.
Each book that I've had, I've worked a different way. With the Illusional Reality, which is a young adult fantasy duology, I saw the film Lord of the Rings, and by the time I got home from the cinema, which took an hour's journey, I had the book in my head from start, middle and end, everything, characters' names, what was going to happen. And as soon as I got home, I started writing it, and it stayed the way that it plotted in my head. Other times, like with flash fiction, there's no plotting, it's bouncing. You know what you've got the three words that you've got to work with to make this flash fiction. So you just go ahead and hopefully you'll warp mind to make something. When it comes to there's one book I'm working with an author, and it's probably the first time I've done plotting. We brainstormed together the first time. We knew we wanted to work together. We knew we wanted to do a dystopian. So we got together on camera on Zoom, and for 2 hours we brainstormed, and we plotted out the whole of the book in those 2 hours. And then we sort of worked together bit by bit, doing different scenes and putting them together and changing stuff. And she was changing stuff, I was changing stuff. And it was such a good world that we created. We didn't want to leave it. So 2 weeks ago, we got together, we brainstormed. This took 1 hour, and book 2 is already plotted out.
Scene lists is a really great place to start, and I really like to do scene lists on index cards because you can add and subtract them, and then you can order them and shuffle them around in any way to find kind of the perfect order for stuff. So that's a really great place to start. I also really like really simple chapter outlines. So this is what's happening in each chapter. These are the characters when they're introduced.
How much of this skeleton do you create? Is it very detailed? Do you guys use it just as a skeletal system to kind of just give you a broad sense, or are you is there many details that you provide within your outlines and your plotting?
Every book is a different way to climb up the mountain for me. So sometimes I get super detailed, like when I do a chapter outline, and I'm like, these are the goals I have for each chapter. These are the literary devices I'm going to use. I'm going to introduce foreshadowing here, and I'm going to do this with the plot here, and I've got it like very intricately designed. And other times I'm just like, this character meets this character, and I'm going to pants that when I get there and see what happens and how they meet and like how they interact with each other. So it really depends on what works for that book.
Yeah, and it gets more involved when you do a series, because like I'm currently writing all first 4 books in my series, and I'm plotting out the series arc for these 4 books. And you can intricately design everything you want, and then all of a sudden you get an idea, and okay, yeah, that character wasn't what we thought, and now you have to go back and fix anything that needs fixing in your outlines and everything. So yeah, okay, yeah, that didn't work, and we have to change that, and yeah, because now she's doing this. And then you find out little bits that you just threw in the first book and the first outline, and then they suddenly become important in book 4 as you're doing all this. So yeah, it gets very complicated and very involved in laying everything out. And you have all these little, I've got an entire compendium for my series now, and along with the scene outlines for every book, I've got all the notes and characters and who knows what else I've got. Oh yeah, I've got magic bits, and it's all very weird.
Well, and the other thing I'll throw in there is it also depends on if you're writing to spec for a publisher, what their requirements are, because some publishers have different requirements around that. Or if, like right now, I'm in a co-writing, we're co-developing a book trilogy. If you're working with another author and you're developing something, you've got to have a lot more structured outline and layout of who's doing what, and make sure that when you start going off the rails that both of you are in agreement about, oh, this character is more than what I thought they were. We need to increase their arc. Maybe their arc is different from where we thought they were going to go. So, I mean, every book has its own aspects. And I mean, the one thing I'll say is, I don't think there is a right way. You know, everybody wants to preach and say, well, the right way is this. You can look at things like the snowflake method. You can look at a lot of these other methods that have been published. It's about what works for you for that project. Because again, if you start delving into more and more projects, number one, you're going to find tools that work better for you. And number two, you're going to find processes that work better for you. And I mean, there's plenty of very successful authors I know that pants it 100%. What they've done is a lot of the times the same thing I do, which is they've outlined it. They've built it in their heads first. Then they figure out what goes to paper so they don't forget it. Versus if you're using tools, and again, I'll go back to, like, if you're using like the Save the Cat method, it becomes a very good and healthy checklist. Even if you don't write and develop against it, if you then use that as kind of a map over the top of the project, it'll tell you if you maybe have some gaps, or if you've got other stuff you've got to come back in and fill in the story.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things real quick. One is that you don't have to do all of this stuff before you write. You can always do it after you write. Just write in each chapter what happens, what characters are introduced, and you'll be able to use that to edit, to say, hey, I don't really have a lot of character B, but I have a ton of A and C, so I need to build up more scenes with character B, or my subplot is really, really not heavy enough. There's not enough of the love story going on underneath everything else, or maybe there's too much going on. And as Anita was saying, if you're writing a series, it's great to take notes and be like, character B has red hair, so you don't say they have black hair later. And this takes place in this city, so I know if I refer back to this scene in a future book, I know it's in Majorca, not somewhere else. The second thing I was going to say is it's kind of like, plotting is like a road trip. So, you know you're going to go from New York to California, and you need to take this major highway to get there because you want to stop at Vegas. And maybe that's all you know, and that's okay. And that's kind of what pantsing is like. You maybe have an idea for the end, or the idea for a big fight between the protagonist and the antagonist, but you don't know how you're going to get there. Other people are super detailed planners, and so they know where they're stopping for their restaurant meals, where they're stopping at the hotel, what time they'll arrive at each place. There's no right or wrong, but like, figure out what works for you. For me, it's different every book, and so I'm constantly playing around with my process.
And I dream of the scene, and it's very, very detailed. I'm in that film, I'm in that scene. I can feel all the emotions. I know exactly what's going on. I know why it happened. I know what's happening, and I know what's going to happen next. So when I wake up, that's what I start writing. I write that scene that I've just dreamed about. And it's scene after scene after scene, and then somehow you have to glue them together. And if you do get stuck and you can't move from one place to another, then leave that completely and go maybe to the end of the book of a scene that you want to write, and then come back to that as a scene, and it works.
I'm curious, Karina, from your perspective, in working with this person and doing this brainstorming session, how much different was that for you, and what was the process like for that?
It was fascinating, and I think that's why we're doing it again. It was fantastic. We couldn't believe how much we got done in those 2 hours. We connected. We knew exactly where we wanted to go. There was no, well, I'm not really happy about that, let's change that. I mean, through the book, when we started writing the scenes each, we swapped them over, and there was something that she didn't like or something I wanted to change, then we'd talk about it, and we'd agree on it or disagree, and come to some sort of good conclusion. But it was a magical time just to talk and say, oh, well, we need a name for a character, right? That's his name. What's this dystopian world all about? Why is it dystopian? And we created that world, and it just got more and more involved. Of course, when you create a world, you have to be very detailed about the world, the environment, the jobs there, the way of life, everything's got to be so detailed. And that all came when we were writing each scene. We came together, I think, only once more on camera, brainstorming. I think it was towards the end of the book. We were and ahhing about how we were going to end it. We thought this was just going to be a one-off. So it's just like 2 sessions, and the rest of it was online, just swapping pieces over and reading and editing her part, her reading and editing my part. And it was a really, really good experience. And because we enjoyed it and because it worked, we're doing it again. But yeah, I mean, the only time I've ever had a whole story written in my head or planned out like that is with Illusional Reality, and now with Toxic. Everywhere else, I've just been pantsing and dreaming of the scenes.
It sounds like to me the writing process, is concurrent with your outlining. Is that fair to say to you guys, or is the writing process something completely different from your outlining? Are they merged together? Do you write as you're outlining, or do you outline and then write after that?
Well, for me, I start with the outline, but as you write, the story does not stick to the outline.
Right.
So the outline changes as you write, and then at the end of the first book, the first character says, "Nope, I'm totally this instead of what you just wrote." So the outline changes, and everything subsequently changes. And then at the end of book 3, you realize that a character from book 1 is now the villain, and so the outline changes again. And the whole process is very malleable.
That's when things start changing. Every author knows this, that you listen to what your characters tell you. And yes, we do hear voices in our head, but if we didn't, we wouldn't have an amazing book like we do. But it's when they start talking, that's when any ideas that you did plot out change, and you listen to your characters.
Start with the outline, and when I plot, especially for a series, I kind of try to plot the overall series and what'll happen in the different books, as well as book 1 before I write. And then obviously things happen in book 1 to give me ideas for book 2. Now, I don't feel the characters necessarily tell me what happens, but as I get to know my characters and figure out how they would respond and react to these situations, then I do get inspired and get ideas for like, oh, they may do this instead of what I thought originally before I knew them as well. So you do update as you go. It doesn't mean you have to like trash everything. A lot of stuff from my outline stays, but like as I'm writing each book and as I'm getting inspiration and stuff, I do scribble out and take my chapter outline and write new things or add things or take things out and say, no, this is what happens instead. And it's really great, like I said, for editing to update as you go so that you can look at the overall picture and be like, okay, this is a good subplot, or this one's strong enough, or whatever you need to do.
2 things. Number 1, why are you writing the work? And number 2 is, what are you trying to accomplish out of the plotting and the outline? And I mean, there are multiple reasons to do both, but let's say you're trying to write a piece of fiction here that is for commercial purposes. You really want to actually sell numbers of books. For me, and again, this is entirely about a for me thing, the reason I use outlining and structuring is it makes me think parts through. And it makes me have conversations with the characters beforehand. And this is part of the reason that a lot of the time I'll write short scenes. I'll write pieces of flash fiction. I'll write these little pieces that are purely unscripted. And sometimes those pieces make it into the final work. But that makes me have that conversation up front. That makes me look at the world. It makes me reconsider how we frame it before actually trying to really put the commercial work to paper. And so outlining for me is making sure I've thought through the plot, especially if you're working on a multi-book arc. And if there's an arc that stretches throughout that entire series, you need to have an idea where you're aiming for at the end of the entire series so that you can be doing foreshadowing. You can be dropping seeds along and along, because unless you're planning to write 4, 5, 7 books up front and then drop them in series, which I know people that do that, there are legitimate reasons to take that approach. But unless you're going to do that and spend the time to then go back and do the rewrites throughout, for me, the biggest value out of putting the time in the plotting, putting the time in the outlines, is because, number one, it saves me time when I sit down to write. There's none of that, oh, okay, what have my characters done today? What do I need to do to push stuff forward? I can sit down and go, okay, this is where they're doing X, and I need to go hammer that out now to this level and degree. So to me, outlining helps speed up that entire process. And if I've spent the time beforehand thinking through the characters, thinking through the actions that need to happen, and I've evaluated everybody's goals and motivations along the way, then actually what I find is those conversations when the character wants to argue with me and say, I don't really want to do that today, I think I should be doing Y. You know, you've got a lot more thought into who they are before you take those actions. And occasionally you just have to kill that character off and then have a conversation again and say, are you ready to behave? And I'll bring you back to life. I mean, you know.
How important is it to update the outline? Is that like the paramount idea, is to make sure that you're constantly updating it? And what have you learned, and what methods have you learned over time to do that, to keep track of that?
Well, that's why I like the scene outlining, because it's just like I've got a list of all the scenes, and I can just go, well, I have to change that scene now, and I have to take that scene out, or add in this scene after it. And it like Julia said, it makes it a lot easier when you're editing. So yeah, the outlines change, and as you're writing as well. Because I mean, if you're come to a point, like when I'm writing, sometimes I come to a point and I realize, well, there's 2 new scenes that have to be added here. So I'll go back to the outline and put them in to make sure I don't forget.
And I mean, the reason that books 4 and 5 of Home Summoning series aren't out is because I got a really cool idea in book 2 that would lead up to some stuff in book 3, and it made for a better story, and it improved the motivations and the goals going throughout, and it blew the hell out of 4 and 5. And so I've now been trying to fix that for longer than I want to admit. I've got the solution for it now that's plugged into the outlines to fix 4, 5, 6, and 7. And now I've just got to sit down and do the writing. But the way I do that, because my outlining, number one, involves these and whiteboards and spreadsheets. And because I'm a good old technology geek, I use a lot of Agile related tools so that you can use basically digital Post-it notes and move them around, slide them around, and watch the effects of that. And because you can do tagging that says this is a dependency on that, you can actually watch when you move pieces around that says, oh, by the way, don't forget, either you've got to fix that dependency or you've got to back it up.
Right. And a lot of the stuff we do kind of subconsciously anyways. Like if you're working with a 3-act structure, so you know now's about where the time where the antagonist would be introduced, and now's about the time where they would have the first pinch point, and then the second pinch point. Here's the midpoint. Here's where they would, do this. And, you kind of develop this subconscious way of saying, like, this is the trajectory the story should follow because you've absorbed other stories so much.
What are some pitfalls of outlining and plotting that you've come across?
It slows the writing down sometimes, because you have to sometimes confer to the outline. Okay, what did that do, and what am I going to do here? And so I think pantsers have maybe a little more free flow move ahead than outliners sometimes.
And for me, I still get to do the exploration part of it for characters or plot or world building by sitting down and going, let me play with this, because if I can't get into that world and I can't get into those characters and I can't have fun with that pretty quickly, whatever it is, that also is a pretty good indicator that I may not want to actually fully develop that out. So, I mean, for me, it's actually a really helpful tool I just know that once I've played with that and have got an idea in my head as to what it looks like and what's going to happen, then I need to spend down and spend the real time with it to say, is this something I'm going to develop out fully? Because, you know, doing a book is a pretty heavy investment.
For me, like the only real impediment plotting has for me as a procrastination technique, because I'm one of those like, well, I can't write the story until I have it plotted, people, right? So if I don't plot it, then I don't write the story. So I get like a little pass on writing for the day.
Yeah, I started doing something I've never done before, and that's putting my work out to the public without it even being edited. I'm working on a new book, and I started putting it on Wattpad. And I've had the plot in my head, like I said, start, middle, end. I know exactly how it's going to go. And I write directly on Wattpad every chapter, leave them to read it, come back a week later, write the next chapter. I've never done that before. But again, I'm plotting, but it's in my head. I'm not writing the plot down. I know exactly how it's ended. I know exactly the next scene I'm doing, which I'll be writing later tonight. And I know where I'm going. And it's not until the book's finished that there may be changes before it's officially published. But for now, I know the line, I know the path. And so far, nothing's changed to how I wanted it to go.
All right, everybody. I'm a pantser, and literally I am a pantser. But for the version of this conversation, I'm going to represent all the pantsers here as well and say to you, Phooey, you're full of rubbish. Convince me why I am wrong.
If I didn't outline, if I didn't put all these things down, my brain would just toss some of them out, and then I'd be nowhere. I'd have no clue what I was doing. So basically, it's pretty much my sieve of a memory. It's the reason I outline. So
For me, because number one, I usually have multiple projects going at a time in various stages of development. And that's a mix of fiction and nonfiction in multiple worlds, multiple pieces. And so the second part to me is about time. So if you're looking to produce work and keep it going and keep it going and keep it going out the door and keep it on schedule, and again, especially if you're working to not only your own timelines from an indie basis, if you also have publisher deadlines and commitments to make, you know, it's a time management thing for me as much as anything else.
Having that idea suddenly come up in my head of this beautiful world, Ticinia, and what's going on in this world, and what the conflict was, and who the characters were. And like I said, when I finished book 1, I had no story ready for book 2, and still until I watched The Two Towers, and then book 2 was plotted in my head.
I agree that it is a big time saver in a lot of ways to plot ahead. One, if I know what my goal is when I sit down, if I say like, Tom's meeting Daisy today, we're going to do this, this is, you know, how it's going to go, then I don't have that moment of like writer's block staring at the blank screen going like, oh my God, what do I write? Because I don't have those huge plot holes where, or inconsistencies or jumps from this scene to that scene where I'm like, how did that happen? How did they connect and how did they get there? I have it all plotted by scene or at least by chapter. So I'm like, I know that it's going to be a clean draft. There is absolutely nothing wrong with pantsing, but a lot of pantsing requires heavy, heavy edits. And once you've figured out the end, you've got to go back through and rewrite the whole beginning because everything has changed so much. And, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's your process of discovering as you go. But it saves so much time for me to be like, I have this outline. I can still discover as I'm in the moment, but I know where I'm headed, so I don't have those big holes everywhere.
So it sounds like, and you guys are also so diplomatic about this. I was hoping for a little bit more vigor. Screw pantsers. Let's be out there. But you guys are also nice. I feel so embraced, even though I'm a pantser. You know, I don't feel ostracized. Thank you so much for making me feel that way.
Joe, you're an ass. Learn to fly.